microphone better? Do we have any questions while we're hanging out?
How did your interview go?
Went really well, thanks for asking.
That's good.
So I wouldn't be surprised if I get that job, but we'll see, you know, because I don't know how there's like 3 people who got to that round of interviews, so let's see how those 2 do. You know, I think that this has been in here like since I started teaching at this school. Like it's just kind of a mystery behind like what it is. What's that?
Like that whole binder?
Yeah. This reminds me of like the ancient Incas. They didn't have like a writing system, but they used to code information by tying knots and colored threads.
I thought it was yours the whole time.
What's that?
I thought it was yours the whole time.
Oh, that? No, that's not mine. I don't know what's going on with it. All right, guys, welcome back to Introduction to Ethics. So, you know, we just finished our first exam. We're about halfway into the semester, and we're about done with ethical theory at this point, right? So we started out in this class, we kind of looked at some theories like cultural relativism and egoism that, you know, they kind of look good at first, but they have serious problems when you kind of look at them more closely, right? And then we looked in more detail at these 2 ethical theories that are by far the most widely held theories by moral philosophers, you know, deontology and utilitarianism, right? And we saw that, you know, those have their strengths. A lot of philosophers like them, but they also have weaknesses and shortcomings. So neither one of those is like a clear winner. It's not, you know, neither one of them is like a clear, like, good, you know, correct theory, right? So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to wrap up this talking about ethical theory. We're going to talk about 3 other ideas. They don't quite have the status of deontology and utilitarianism, partially because, in a sense, they're a lot newer, and they're just not quite as well worked out. But these are also like serious contenders for being the correct moral theory. So we're going to start by talking about social contract theory. Depending on how far we get today, you should either read chapter 12 about care ethics or not, right? So if there's like a lot of discussion and stuff, this is all we'll do this week. If it goes by pretty fast, we'll get to chapter 12 on Thursday. Everybody understand? Okay. So I'll let you know at the end of class, all right? So anyway, we're going to start out by talking about social contract theory, all right? Has anybody heard of social contract theory before this? Yeah, like, have you guys heard of that? From like, where'd you hear about it? Did they talk about that in your high school social studies class? Yeah, so everybody's heard of it before, right? Because I know when I was in high school, I was in high school a long time ago, but they talked about it a lot in my social studies class. Anyway, so what does it mean? What's a social contract? What is this? What is it?
Isn't it that there are like certain like rules in society that you don't break, and as long as you don't break them, it's like
It sounds like the law.
yeah.
No, I mean, you're kind of along the right lines, all right. So, all right, to get an idea of what we're talking about here, we can go way back to the start of Western philosophy, all right? So Plato, he wrote a dialogue, like the Euthyphro, is a dialogue between two characters, and just like the Euthyphro was named after Euthyphro, this guy who was talking to Socrates, the Crito is named after Crito, all right? And it's supposed to be a record of this discussion, like I said, between Socrates, the teacher of Plato, and Crito. So this conversation took place in the prison of the city of Athens, all right? Does anybody know this story? Nobody knows why Socrates was in jail? Okay, so Socrates was in jail waiting to be executed, all right? And there's kind of a long backstory here, but Socrates had been convicted by a jury of corrupting the youth of Athens and by teaching them dangerous ideas and by preaching atheism, by telling them to abandon the traditional gods of the city where they lived, all right? So based on the account of Plato and other people who wrote about this, it was like a frame job, all right? He wasn't really guilty of that. What had happened is that he'd embarrassed too many, remember he liked to go around and talk to people about ethics, and he liked to do this in public, and he would talk to people like he talked to Euthyphro, and a lot of the time he challenged them to public debates on moral philosophy, and there was all these rich and powerful people where he exposed them as being ignorant or incompetent when it comes to morals and like kind of knowing what ethics are, all right? And so he made a lot of enemies. So he wasn't really guilty of anything in the legal sense. He wasn't guilty of what he was charged with, but he had really kind of upset the status quo and, made a lot of important people angry, right? So what he did, he didn't have a very good defense strategy. He went to court and he basically lectured the jury. There was a 501 person jury. That's how they did things in Athens, right? And he lectured the jury about how they were dumb too, and that really kind of antagonized them, and he didn't just get convicted, he got sentenced to death, all right? But Socrates had a lot of like rich and powerful friends as well. Like Plato was from a very rich family, and Crito and a lot of people sympathized with him, and Crito had come to him to tell him that they had a plan where they bribed the authorities of the city, and the authorities were going to let him escape, all right? So how did Socrates respond to this offer? How do you think he responded? Do you think he was like, hell yeah, I'm out of here? All right, who knows what happened to Socrates? Did he escape from jail? What happened to him?
He was executed.
He was executed, right? So he obviously didn't take this offer, okay? So he turned down the chance to escape, right? Why do you think he did that? Why did he say no? Why do you think he would have done that? Yeah,
He didn't think it was just.
he didn't think it, okay, good, he didn't think it was just, he didn't think it was fair. What do you think he didn't think was fair about it? Yeah, cool.
I guess that the rules didn't apply to him, but they do to everyone else.
That's a really good way of putting it. That's really good, okay? He said it would be wrong of him to disobey the laws of his city, all right? So why do you think he would say that? Like, I can't disobey the rules. I can't let the rules apply to other people but not apply to me. Why do you think that was important to him?
Fairness.
Fairness was kind of part of it, right? But there was kind of a little bit more to it. Why would somebody say that? Why would they say I can't disobey the law of where I live?
Integrity,
Integrity is a big part of it. Why do you think integrity is involved?
because like he embarrassed all these other people for being,
For being like ignorant?
fallacies in
Yeah.
their theories and whatnot,
Yeah.
and then that would make all his theories
Right,
invaluable.
well, how would they do that? Why do you think integrity is involved in obeying the law? Because like the law's not being very fair here, is it? I mean, do you think that's fair what happened to him? Like, yeah, I mean, he was a smart ass, but that's not, like, you don't get a death penalty for being a smart ass, right? It seems awfully harsh. Okay, so why do you think he was like, oh yeah, well, that is what it is, but I still have to be executed? Yeah.
In a way, does it like kind of prove his points? Like, kind of like,
Well, you mean like if he ran, there would be an admission of guilt?
right.
You know, there may have been, I kind of suspect that there was something like that going on in his mind, but that's not the reason he gave. That's not the reason he gave. So, yeah, cool.
I guess it like enforces society, like how society is run is that it's run based on a set of rules, and
Right.
you need to uphold those rules to have a society.
Yeah, that's a good part. That's kind of what was going on in his mind. Did everybody hear that? You know, you have to have rules to uphold society, right? Do you think he liked his society? Well, I mean, he lived there his whole life, right? So, Socrates reminded Crito, he said, look, I was brought up in Athens. The city educated me, right? The city taught me like the way a parent teaches it. You know, I went to its schools, the city educated me. And what's more, when I became an adult, I stayed there. I didn't go somewhere else, right? And he reasoned like, look, I'm a grown man. I was fully capable of seeing what kind of place I lived in, right? I saw what the laws were. I saw how the laws were enforced. I was free to leave at any time. I could have gone to Sparta or Corinthians or like wherever, right? Corinth. I could have gone to Sparta or Corinth, right? And what that meant to him is that he had agreed that the laws of the city were just and reasonable, okay? So not only that, but by living in Athens and benefiting from the security and prosperity that it had to offer, he had implicitly agreed to be bound by the city's laws, all right? So do you guys understand where Socrates is coming from here? What he's saying? Okay, do you think he's right? Do you think he's right that he was making an agreement by staying in this city? Yeah, does it sound right? Okay. So do you think like, you know, by like living in this society, are you making an agreement like to obey the laws here no matter what? Yeah. Even if they're not fair? Yeah.
See, but I can't really leave as easily as he could.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you could go to like Canada, right? I mean, people are always saying that. They're like, I'm gonna go to Canada if like X wins the election, you know? So. Yeah.
I mean, are you saying that you can't like say that laws are unjust?
Well, that's what he's saying. He's saying by living here, I've accepted that the laws are just, right?
I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that? Why not?
Because, I mean, you can't always move yourself, and I don't think the law's always going to be like 100% correct. I think that there's always going to be like some kind of form of law that's just,
Well, yeah, I think, so like, I think he accepts that, right? That like the law is never gonna be perfect. But he's like, by staying here, I've accepted that the law is good enough to live with, right? And by doing that, you know, why do you think I'm introducing this? Why do you think I'm talking about this right now, right? He's saying by being here, I'm kind of like in a contract, right? I've accepted that the law is good enough. Yeah,
Isn't that what the social contract theory is?
that's why I'm talking about this right now, right? He's like, yeah, you know, by being here, I've essentially entered into a contract with this city, right? I've said, look, I like it here enough that I stayed, and I've taken all the benefits of Athens. I took the what it had to offer, right? You know, the education and the chance to like wander around and do my thing right up until it got to be too much, and the security and everything. And you know, like in the war with Sparta, when they told me to like go fight, I went and fought. And like when the general said to stand in a certain place in the battle, I did that. And now it's the same thing, you know, like they're telling me to be executed and I have to obey that. So does that seem right? Yeah. I don't know. Seems kind of extreme though, right? Well, anyway. All right. So what Socrates is kind of claiming here is that there's like an implicit contract between him and the society that he's freely chosen to be a part of, right? So clearly this contract was really important to him. He would rather die than fail to uphold his end of the contract, right? But so, you know, obviously this is kind of like social contract theory, but at the same time, this was a little bit different than modern social contract theory, right? The modern kind of social contract theory that Rachel's was discussing in his book. And that's because Plato and Socrates, they were moral realists. Can anybody remember what that means from like way back in the day, like a moral realist, what that is? Yeah.
They're objective moral values.
There's objective moral values. There's objective moral values are objective. They're like facts about the world, right? It's like there's a fact about how tall I am. There's like a fact about how many people are in this room, or like what the tallest mountain is, and so on and so forth. So moral values are facts to moral realists, okay? So that's how Plato and Socrates thought about morality. That's not how modern social contract theorists think about it, right? So a moral realist, they think that ethical principles really exist. They exist out there in the world in some sense. And Plato and Socrates, they were realists in a very strong sense, right? So for them, ethical principles, those are not only really existing things, they were more real than physical objects or anything else in the world that you can see, right? So, you know, this should, just like Liliana and Max, this should be kind of ringing a bell, right? They thought that like justice is more real than like this podium, okay? So the philosophy of Plato, it's really interesting. If you ever get a chance to take like a class in Greek philosophy, like you should do it. Like especially here, like Dr. Larkin is like an awesome professor. But the point, have you had any classes with him?
I'm taking Greek right now.
Oh, are you? Yeah, he's something. Yeah, he used to be like a professional rock musician, and he like toured with all these bands. So like, I'm not into him, but I've heard of him, like Nickelback and stuff. And so like, he's an interesting guy. You know. Anyway, point is social contract, like the implicit one between Socrates and Athens. To Plato and Socrates, that's like a small part of what morality is, okay? So for them, you know, you have ethical principles, and then the social contract theory, that's a part of it. Social contract's like a part of what morality is, okay? So, in the way that this generally works now to like 21st century social contract theorists, these are like the same, okay? Does everybody kind of understand what I'm saying? Okay, so to modern social contract people, it's an anti-realist theory. They see the social contract as being anti-realist in the sense that ethical principles, they just boil down to like this agreement that people have made, and that's all there is to it. There's nothing else, all right? So wrong and right, they're what the contract says, there's nothing else to it, and without the contract, there is no right or wrong, okay? So is that making sense to everybody? What is this, does this remind you of like another theory we've talked about a little bit? This should kind of ring a bell, yeah.
Relativism.
Yes, this is basically a kind of cultural relativism, but it's kind of more worked out, and it doesn't have like the contradictory aspects, okay? So, social contract theory, as we know it today, goes back to a guy you might have heard of. Thomas Hobbes, who was a British philosopher who lived from 1588 for like a long time to 1679. All right, Thomas Hobbes. Anybody heard of Thomas Hobbes? Yeah, a few of you. Okay, so Hobbes did not believe that anything at all existed except matter. That's all he believed in. Kind of like modern, the way most modern like thinkers think, like most modern scientists. And so he could not be a moral realist, right? That doesn't work. But and given the time he was alive, he could not come right out and say that he was an atheist, but it kind of seems like he was kind of thinking that way, and God did not have any kind of role in his theories, okay? So from his point of view, morality, it can't be based on religion either, right? But Hobbes did believe in morality of a sort, okay? Hobbes had a very dim view. You might say he had like kind of a realistic view of human nature, okay? Do you guys know that comic strip, Calvin and Hobbes? Do you guys all know that? Who knows that? Okay, where do you think the name of the tiger comes from, right? Because you know the tiger's like very cynical about people, right? He makes a lot of comments about kind of how people are, and that's why he's named after Thomas Hobbes, right? You know where Calvin's named after?
John Calvin.
John Calvin, right? Because he believed in some people are predestined to be bad, right? Okay, anyway. So, all right, so Hobbes, he thought that people should and they do accept moral constraints because people need moral constraints. They need a system of moral constraints to keep themselves safe from other people, all right? So Hobbes, he liked to talk about what he called the state of nature. All right? And the state of nature was kind of supposed to be a time in history before there was governments, laws, or any way of resolving conflicts. All right? So what do you suppose the state of nature was like? What was that like? Chaos? Yeah. I don't know, does that seem right? Do you think it was chaos? Does it sound like a nice place to live? Yeah. All right. So we all need certain resources to survive, right? And that stuff, it's not just laying around for us to take. So people are going to get into conflicts and they're going to fight and try to get the stuff that they need. Okay? So Hobbes imagined that in such circumstances, there, as he put it, a continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Okay, that's a famous line. Life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Okay? The quote is not Thomas Hobbes was nasty British in short, which I've seen show up in papers before. Life in the state of nature is nasty, solitary British in short, all right? Do you think he's right about that? Is that how the state of nature sounds? Yeah. Okay, so Hobbes, he didn't think of this theory, so nobody in here is like an anarchist, I guess. Right, okay, so Hobbes, he didn't just think of this theory as being about a hypothetical past, right? He based it on what he saw during his life, right? Because what did he live through? Does anybody know what was going on at that time? Yeah.
Wasn't there a civil war?
The English Civil War, exactly. Yeah, he saw the English Civil War, right? So during the English Civil War, British society almost collapsed, and people's worst natures came out, right, as they tend to do in a war, all right? So in order not just to get the benefits of civilization, but in order to have like minimal levels of safety and security, people need guarantees that if they don't interfere with others, and they help other people out in times of need, then they can expect the same thing in return. Okay, they need that. Nobody's big and bad enough that they can make it on their own. Okay, because even if you're like the baddest guy out there, the biggest, baddest guy out there, other people can gang together and take your stuff and kill you, right? So even if everybody agrees to rules like that, so even if everybody agrees to the rules, what else do you need to make this work? Like, okay, you got rules, now what do you need? Yeah.
And to be enforced.
You need some way of enforcing them, right? So people being how they are, they're gonna try to get away from benefiting from this arrangement, but breaking the rules whenever they think that they can do it, right? So you need a way of making sure that people understand the rules and there's mechanisms to make sure that they're followed, right? So that means that you need all this other stuff. You need a government, you need law enforcement, you need a legal system, you need taxes, and all that other stuff that goes along with civilized society, right? So, does anybody know, what was the name of Hobbes' most famous book? Does anybody know that? Yeah. Leviathan, right? His most famous book was called Leviathan. All right, so what was Leviathan? What was it? What's that named after? It's a sea creature. You're right, like from the Bible, right? Was it big? What did it do? Crushed people, right? Went around and crushed people. So do you think that kind of tells you something about how Hobbes envisioned government working? So, the Leviathan, it's a reference to an enormous monster in the Bible, and that's how Hobbes thought that government needs to be. It needs to be powerful and ready to crush without mercy anybody who gets out of line, all right? So Hobbes' ideas, they resembled those of Socrates in that he felt that by living in a society, we're implicitly accepting a contract. Okay, like we never go sign it, but by choosing to be in society, you're accepting that this contract is governing you, okay? So that makes it amoral for you to break the law or to disobey the government, no matter how much you might disagree with what the government does, all right? You may not like it, but hey, you chose to live here, you're taking what the government has to offer, so you need to do what it says, all right? So disagreement with government, so this idea that the government is always right, it's something that not all social contract theorists agree with, right? Most modern social contract theorists don't agree with this. But the central point of social contract theory is that all social contract philosophers agree with is that morality is just this set of rules we agree to by living in a society. It's nothing more, it's nothing less. That's what morality is, right? There's nothing deeper than that. There's no principles of morality or anything. Morality is just something that we agree to out of our own self-interest, right? So, besides like having certain parallels with cultural relativism, So this, obviously, this resembles cultural relativism, right? Does this remind you of any other kind of ethical theory that we've talked about? Yeah,
Overall utilitarianism?
kind of, a little bit, right? What do you think Hobbes's overall view of people? What kind of theory does that sound like?
Egoism?
Egoism, right? It sounds like so. Hobbes was a psychological egoist, right? He was probably the only philosopher who had that theory, right? And he was also, an ethical egoist, right? You should look out for yourself. So social contract theory, it's a lot like, it's like egoism, right? People are looking out for themselves. They should look out for themselves. And the best way for them, but it happens that the best way for them to look out for themselves is to band together and have rules, right? So, Hobbes, he assumed everyone was out for themselves, and he's like, look, we should just be realistic about this fact, and we should encourage people to follow their self-interest in order to get them to accept moral constraints, because the moral constraints are going to be in their self-interest, right? So for Hobbes, when there's no contract in place, there is no morality. Anything goes, right? And so we can define social contract theory like this. All right, this is a long definition. All right? That's social contract theory. Yeah, it's a lot, right? So morality consists in a set of rules governing how people are to treat one another. And it's a set of rules that rational people will agree to for their mutual benefit on the condition that others are going to follow those rules as well. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Everybody feel like they understand this idea? And what do you think? Does that sound right to you? Is that what morality is? You're like, no. Why not?
Seems to, I feel like there's morality outside of society.
Okay, so you're like a realist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a moral realist, social contract theory can be a part of morality, but it can't, kind of like it was for Socrates, but it can't just be what morality is, right? Most people these days are not moral realists, though. They're like, moral realism is weird. They're like, I know what makes Dr. Eno 6'3". I don't know what makes murder wrong. Like, that's not a fact about the role. It's a fact about like a contract, right? But whatever, like I'm a moral realist too. Like most people aren't. Anyway, so Hobbes, he felt like you needed the idea of a social contract and the institutions that come along with it to keep things from just collapsing into like brutal anarchy, right? So after him, a couple of other people that you might have heard of, John Locke, and Locke was around from 1632 to 1704. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who lived from 1712 to 1778. Okay, do you guys know those names? Are those kind of ringing a bell? Yeah. So you might kind of recognize them from like a history class because they had a lot of influence on the American founding fathers, right? And they had theories that were very, in important ways, they were very different from Hobbes. Locke believed, he was a moral realist. He believed there is an objective morality that comes from God. And Rousseau thought the opposite of Hobbes. He thought that people are naturally good. They're naturally great. And the state of nature would be great if we could stay in the state of nature. But they agreed with Hobbes that living in a social contract, living by a social contract, that's what was in everybody's best interest to do. All right? So the major 20th century philosopher who advocated social contract theory was John Rawls. And he developed social contract theory into a very specific idea called the veil of ignorance. That was a way of ensuring the most just possible society, all right? So we're going to talk more about Rawls and the veil of ignorance later on when we talk about justice, which is what we're going to talk about next. But for right now, I want to talk about another way that social contract theory is often kind of advocated for in contemporary philosophy, right? So, as I've said kind of a few times in this course, and as a matter of fact, I was just saying it right now, moral realism, it's not really popular with philosophers, right, these days, because it doesn't fit in well with kind of the modern scientific view of the world, all right? So philosophers who are not moral realists, they need to look for another idea that kind of motivates moral behavior to give people a reason to live together peacefully, all right? They need something besides like real moral rules because they don't think there is such a thing, right? So social contract theory fits really well with what they're looking for because it's motivated by people's self-interest, and we all agree that self-interest exists, right? We all know that, right? We all know we have interests, right? And it's not supposed to be motivated by independently existing moral truths, which scientifically minded people do not believe in, okay? So one way of seeing that rational self-interest might lead to cooperating with others and eventually get to something like social contract theory, it's through what's called game theory. All right, so game theory is a branch of mathematics that's concerned with decision making, okay? And one of the most famous ideas in game theory is what's called prisoner's dilemma. All right, anybody in here heard of prisoner's dilemma? Yeah.
What did you say game theory was?
It's a branch of mathematics that deals with decision making. Anybody in here heard of prisoner's dilemma? Yeah, you have? Good. Yeah. What do you know about it? Oh, yeah, wasn't it reading? Okay, great. Yeah, you all should have heard about it. All right, anyway. Okay, so, man, I should have had a quiz today. All right, so the prisoner's dilemma, it can be set up different ways, all right? But one way of telling the story, it's like this, okay? You and some person you don't know, let's just call him Smith, all right? You're arrested and you guys are accused of breaking into a bank and stealing a bunch of money, okay? And you never have an opportunity to talk to Smith at all, but eventually the public defender comes and she explains your options to you, okay? If you confess to the crime, the prosecutor's gonna let you go by using you to testify against Smith, all right? so assuming that Smith doesn't also confess, in that case, you get to go free, and Smith is gonna get convicted and do 10 years in prison, okay? But on the other hand, if Smith confesses and you don't confess, he gets the same deal, and you're gonna do 10 years and he's gonna go free, all right? So the catch is, if you both confess, right, if you both confess, nobody needs your testimony, okay? And in that case, they're not gonna let either one of you go, but they're just gonna give you 5 years each, because in that case, at least the prosecutor doesn't have to take it to trial, so she's happy, right? So finally, if neither one of you confesses, there's enough evidence, they can't get you for the bank robbery, but they can convict you both of trespassing, they can do that, and then you're both gonna get 1 year, all right? So does everybody understand what's going on here? Okay, so you can put this on a chart. Okay, and we'll put us here, and we'll put Smith up here, right? And Smith either confesses or he doesn't. And you either confess or you don't. Okay? So we'll put your jail time on the left and we'll put Smith's on the right. Okay? So what happens if you both confess? 5 years each, right? All right. What happens if you confess and Smith doesn't?
You walk away.
You walk, and what happens to Smith?
He gets 10.
He gets 10. Okay, what happens if you don't confess and Smith confesses?
He walks away.
And you get 10, right? Okay, and what happens if neither one of you confesses? Both do a year, right? Okay, does everybody understand that chart? Everybody understand what's going on here? Okay. Now, suppose for the sake of argument, like Hobbes is right, you're just totally self-interested, okay? You don't care about anything but yourself, all right? And all you care about right now is not going to prison, okay? You just want to get out of prison, all right? And remember, you never have a chance to talk to Smith. You can't communicate with Smith in any way, but you know that the public defender's been by to see him and told him the same thing that she told you, okay? So, if you're just trying to stay out of jail, what's the logical thing to do in this situation? Confess? Does everybody agree? Who says confess? Who says don't confess? Okay, why is it better to confess?
Because there's the chance that you don't get any jail time.
There's a chance that nothing happens to you? Yeah, it's even more than that, right? So, you're better off confessing, okay? To use the technical term from game theory, confessing strongly dominates. Okay, meaning no matter what happens, no matter what Smith does, you're better off having confessed, okay? So, if you confess, right, and Smith doesn't confess, you go free, right? And if you didn't confess and Smith doesn't confess, you would have got a year in jail. So it's better for you to confess. In that, if Smith doesn't confess, you're better off having confessed, right? Does that make sense? Okay. If Smith confesses and you didn't confess, you would have got 10 years. So if you confess, you get 5 years, which sucks, but it's better than getting 10. All right, does that make sense to everybody? You're better off confessing than not confessing, regardless of what Smith does, okay? So it strongly dominates, all right? So does everybody understand that, why you're better off confessing? Okay, but what do you think the catch to that is? There's a catch. What do you think the catch is? Yeah,
If he doesn't, then he gets the full 10 years.
well, I mean, there's that, but you don't care about Smith. You're a jerk, you're a psychological egoist. What do you think Smith is thinking?
Same thing,
Same thing, right? So what's gonna happen, where are you guys gonna wind up?
5
5
and 5.
and 5, okay, what was the best thing that could have happened?
1-1.
1 and 1, right? So, you're both gonna go, what's gonna end up, just inevitably end up happening is you're both gonna go down for 5 years, right? And that's better than 10, but like, this is kind of like probably the best thing that could have happened, realistically, right? Because Smith is not gonna take 10 years so you can go free, any more than you do that for him. So really, this is the best situation, but you're inevitably gonna end up here, because everybody's looking out for themselves, right? So, if you can communicate with Smith, if you got the chance to talk to him before you have to enter your pleas, what could you try to do?
Tell him to keep his mouth shut.
Well, I mean, I don't know, you're gonna threaten him. I kinda get what you're saying, what would you do?
I guess convince them that you're going to also not confess.
Yeah, you make some kind of deal with him, you get him to keep his mouth shut, right? Yeah, you make some kind of deal with him, right? So, you try to get him to agree that you should both refuse to confess, and then you both get the 1-year sentence and be done with it, right? But if you're really a self-interested person, after you get Smith to agree to that, what are you gonna do?
Confess.
Yeah, you're gonna go in and confess, right, and then you're gonna go free, and he's gonna get 10 years. Okay, but the problem is, even after you make this agreement, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go change my plea, what do you think Smith is thinking?
The same thing.
Same thing, right, so you're gonna end up back here and spending everything, okay? So, that doesn't look very good, that's not very good, right, but, suppose that you're gonna play this game a bunch of times, okay? So this story's not very realistic, like you and Smith are not gonna keep getting arrested over and over, but like, just imagine you're in some kind of situation where the structure of the game is the same, and you're gonna have to keep doing this over and over again, all right? Then, what do you, does that change anything, do you think? Do you think that's different? Yeah.
Yeah, because you want Smith to like really trust you if you're doing it over and over again. So like if you confess, that ruins the trust.
And Smith is, what do you think Smith is thinking?
That same thing.
The same thing, right? So what's gonna end up happening in that situation? If you're playing the game over and over, you know, you want Smith to trust you, and you know he thinks the same way you do, he's rational, he wants you to trust him, what do you think's gonna end up happening? Yeah, you're gonna keep ending up here, okay? Because it's in your interest in that case to try to not confess and see if Smith responds, right? If you're gonna play this over and over, you wanna keep winding up in the most mutually beneficial place, so you can try to cooperate and see if Smith responds, okay? All right, so what do you think the moral of this story is supposed to be? What do you think the point of it is? Yeah, Max?
People should work together to get outcomes that are both of them.
Yeah, people should work together to get the best possible outcome, okay? So, you can change this story a little bit and imagine these are like people in a society, say there's some kind of work that they have to do. If, you know, one of them does all the work, another one doesn't, that really sucks for the person who does all the work. You know, if nobody does it, like, everything's gonna like fall apart, but at least nobody had to like do work. The best thing would be if they both like invest some time into it, right? That's like the best option, okay? Anyway, a lot of people think that this result is considered like really important by a lot of people in like political science and fields like that, because it shows that given the simple assumption that most people are rational and most people are looking out for themselves, it's a mathematical fact that you're better off cooperating, all right? And what's being described here, it's basically social contract theory by which moral truths, they're not like really existing things, but you have an incentive to act as if they were real and to cooperate with other people, okay? So, in fact, some people suggest that thinking about Prisoner's Dilemma, that shows why human psychology evolved in the way that it did, because people who can get along with other people and cooperate with them, they're going to be the ones who survive and prosper, and those traits are going to be selected for by evolution and be passed on, okay? So what do you guys think? Is that pretty good evidence for social contract theory? Is that how we should be thinking about morality? Well, yeah, you like it? Well,
I like it.
you like it? Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
They're dubious.
I'm just thinking like, what if they take, what if, like, you make the deal, and then one of them, like, breaks the deal, and someone ends up getting 10 and the other gets free,
Well, so if you're playing this over and over,
yeah.
what's going to wind up happening is that one person's going to do that once, right? And then you're going to be back, and then you're going to be like, oh, well, screw you, I'm not going to cooperate with you anymore. And you're going to be in that 5-5 for the rest of however long you play it. Does that make sense? Like, nobody wants that, right? So like you're kind of like holding each other prisoner in a sense, right? A lot of people say this kind of like models like the nuclear situation too, like everybody's kind of holding everybody else hostage, right? Like nobody wants to end up here, so we can't go here even once, right? If we're gonna do this over and over, and we don't know how long especially if we don't know how long we're gonna be playing, right? Which is kind of like, that's kind of like your life in society, right? You don't know how long you're gonna be playing. So sometimes like following the rules of society is inconvenient, right? But we know we're better off here than we are anywhere else, right? Okay, so let's talk about the advantages of social contract theory, okay? So one thing I should mention, when I talk about social contract theory, just like utilitarianism and deontology, this is a type of theory. It is not a specific theory, okay? Social contract theory, it tells us where moral principles are supposed to come from and what purpose they're supposed to serve, but it doesn't tell us specifically what rules we're supposed to have to actually guide our behavior, okay? And major social contract theorists like Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau and Rawls, they all had different ideas about what the moral code should look like, okay? But we can still outline the major philosophical advantages and disadvantages of this type of theory, okay? So why do you think somebody might like social contract theory? What do you think is good about it? Any ideas? No? Oh, yeah, well,
It promotes cooperation.
it definitely does that. It promotes cooperation, right? That's kind of front and center, right? Anything else? So we have like a social contract in this class too, right? There's certain norms we follow. Yeah. Cool.
Oh, I guess like you said earlier, it can provide a reason for anti-realism.
What's that?
Provides a
Oh,
reason
yeah, it's
for
like an anti-realist theory. Yeah, so a lot of people like that, they like the fact that it's anti-realist, right? Okay. All right, so this is the way Rachel's answers this, okay? He says, look, like moral philosophy is hard. We've seen that already in this class. It poses questions for which any answer is going to be highly contentious, all right? So Rachel's, what he says in his book is, look, social contract theory, it gives clear and plausible answers. And that might seem to some of those questions, and the fact that it gives such clear and like believable answers, that's kind of a major advantage that it has, okay? So one question that you always have with any kind of moral theory is, what moral rules are we bound to follow? Okay, and how are those rules justified? Okay, so that's a question you can ask about moral theories, okay? Social contract theory's got a very neat answer to that. How do you think social contract theory answers that? How would a social contract theory answer that? Yeah, cool.
And just straight up with its definition of.
It's just right there in the definition. That's exactly right. So, social contract theory's got a very neat answer to that question. You need to have the moral rules that you need to live together as a society. You have no more, you have no less. And the justification, it's self-interest, okay? So the rules that you're bound to follow are the rules that it takes society to hold together, and they're justified by self-interest, all right? So that means that it would be wrong to worry about things that you might feel uncomfortable with, but they don't necessarily interfere with others in society, right? So things like drug use or like sexual behavior that's outside of the mainstream, social contract theory, they don't care, okay? Because all you need are the rules that you need to hold society together. You don't need to regulate people's lives otherwise, right? So who do you think finds this? What kind of political position do you think finds social contract theory appealing? Yeah.
Libertarians.
Libertarians like social contract theory, right? And like the founding fathers, like the people who wrote the Constitution, they were really into social contract theory, right? Because at least for them, and like people like them, you know, it didn't really it basically just didn't interfere with what they wanted to do, right? And that's how they liked it, okay? So that's kind of ironic, considering this started with like Hobbes and Leviathan, but anyway. So another question you can ask is, why is it reasonable to follow the rules? Why should we follow the rules, okay? So, you know, for most moral theories, at the end of the day, assuming that you're an anti-realist, which like I said, most people these days are, there's always this kind of question in the background, like why be moral? Why should you do it, right? So why do you think social contract theory, how does it answer that? If somebody's just like, I don't see the point, I don't see why I should be moral, like it's not in my, I don't care about that, why should I care? What would the social contract theorists say? Yeah, cool.
It's in your self-interest.
Yes, exactly. It's in your self-interest, right? So, social contract theory, you know, it's kind of hard if somebody's just like, I don't care, okay? It's kind of hard to tell them why they should care about, why they should be a deontologist or utilitarian, all right? Social contract theory, it's got a very neat answer for that, right? It just says, look, it's in your best interest to cooperate, it's, you know, the prisoner's dilemma shows that. If you don't wanna be a part of society when it all falls apart, you need to follow the rules, okay? So if you break the rules when you're dealing with other people, they might do the same thing back to you, right? You definitely don't want that. Okay, 3, okay, under what conditions can you break the rules? All right? So other moral rules, other moral theories, they can kind of get into sticky situations with this, all right? Kind of concerning whether there's circumstances under which you might be justified in bending or breaking the rules, all right? So for example, we saw like one of the major drawbacks with like Kant's theory of deontology is that it's so inflexible, right? And it holds that you can't even, you know, it says you can't even break minor rules to save lives, right? And it's kind of hard to know how you can make that theory more flexible without just kind of giving it up altogether, right? So social contract theory's got an easy answer, right? What do you think it says about this? When can you break rules? Yeah, Megan?
What's in your best interest?
When it's in your best interest to break them? Kind of, like, they don't generally think it's gonna be in your best interest to break the rules, because, I mean, I guess, like, yeah, if it was really in your best interest to just do away with the rules, you would, but they don't really think that that's generally gonna happen, right? So what would be another kind of situation, maybe? Yeah,
When the social contract isn't upheld.
when it's not being upheld, yeah, Cole?
When you're leaving that society that you're in.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, then, yeah, for sure, right? But like, what's an example of like, yeah, Ruby?
When you're not getting the benefits from following rules.
Right, when does that happen?
Like you said, like Martin Luther King.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's kind of a different topic, right? But you know, you're right. It's when somebody's breaking the contract towards you, right? The social contract theory, it's supposed to be reciprocal, right? So it's supposed to be a two-way street. If somebody is not following the terms of the contract, then you don't have to observe that contract towards her either, right? So that's why, like, you're justified in defending yourself against aggression. That's why society can punish criminals, right? When somebody doesn't follow the contract, you don't need to follow it back, okay? So what do you think, like, so think about the murderer at the door example, right? Like the inquiring murderer. What would a social contract theorist say about that? Would they lie or not lie? Yeah, they would lie. Why would they lie?
Because the murderer is currently trying to murder someone, which is outside of the.
Outside of the social contract, exactly, right? The murderer's behavior is taken them out of the social contract, okay? So most rational people are gonna wanna rule against lying to be a part of the social contract, because you gotta be able to communicate and to trust each other while you do so, right? But because the murderer is not following the rules himself by chasing that poor kid around with an axe, you're not bound to observe the contract in the way that you treat him either, right? And in kind of a similar way, so that also goes with what you're saying. Like if somebody's being mistreated by society, like Martin Luther King was a good example, like they're just like, yeah, I'm not bound by these rules, right? So they kind of see things a little bit differently than like Socrates did. So we saw, another thing is that social contract theory, it shows really well kind of what morality can ask out of you and what it can't. And this ties back into what Megan was saying, kind of. So we saw that like utilitarianism, it can kind of get into weird situations where sometimes it's like asking too much out of you, It suggests like you should be sacrificing your own well-being or even like the well-being of your friends and family for like the sake of total strangers, right? And on the other hand, like deontology can also require you to make big sacrifices. Deontology can even require you to sacrifice your life or the life of others in order to avoid breaking rules that may not seem like they're as important as a life is, right? So social contract theory doesn't really have this problem. Social contract theory is a theory that's never going to ask too much out of you, right? Because the social contract theory, it's something that you enter into for your own benefit, and it can't require you to make sacrifices that are so serious that the contract is not doing you any good anymore, right? It can't require, for example, that you give up your life to save somebody else, right? It can't ask that out of you. All right, and 4, does morality have an objective basis? Okay, so this is kind of the same idea, it's anti-realist, all right? So, we've been talking a lot about moral realism and the question of whether there are really existing moral principles. And as I've said several times, a lot of people these days want to say no. There's not any such kind of funny, like abstract things existing out there in the world as like a moral principle, right? But at the same time, those people who say that there's no moral principles, most of them don't want to be a nihilist either and just say, look, there's no such thing as morality and everything goes. Most people don't want to take it that far, right? So one answer to that is to leave morality up to like the individual or the society, and there's kind of serious problems with that, right? It seems to like kind of cause more problems than it's going to solve. Social contract theory is a way of kind of solving this quandary because it lets us be anti-realists, but at the same time to have an objective basis for a system of morality, right? So the moral principles that we should be following are the principles that will hold us together as a society and let us live together as a society. So we don't need any kind of abstract principles that exist independently of us, all right? So does everybody kind of understand these points and why these are supposed to be, why it's supposed to be good for social contract theory, that it can like answer them all really, really easily? Yeah. Okay, so some people also feel that it's a strength of social contract theory that it can account for the permissibility of civil disobedience. All right. So if you have like a minority or some other group that's being oppressed, or it's not getting fairly treated, it seems like it's fair for them to disobey, to like not cooperate fully with society, or even if it's bad enough to just have a full-out revolt to try to remedy the situation or remedy the fact that they're being mistreated, right? That seems right to most people, okay? So that's good. That might be kind of hard for other theories to justify, right? Especially like utilitarianism. Why do you think civil disobedience is kind of hard for utilitarianism? Why would civil disobedience be kind of hard for utilitarianism to justify? Yeah, well,
Because usually it's hard to like have civil disobedience without like something happening, like someone gets not necessarily hurt, but
yeah,
you risk something.
you risk something, right? You risk the stability of the group, right? So, look, a utilitarian, they might have to say, look, if things are going overall well, right? If the system of the laws and the social structures that are in place are doing more good for more people than they are causing harm, all right? that a utilitarian who's really kind of sticking to her principles, she might have to say, like, look, that oppressed group, they shouldn't do anything that's gonna damage that system, okay, because it's good for most people. You guys understand what I'm saying? Okay? So they might say, look, you gotta be patient, you gotta work for reform within the system, don't do anything that's gonna like rock the boat, because it's better for most people the way it is, all right? Now, how do you think a social contract theorist would think about a situation like that? Yeah,
Is it in your self-interest to keep following?
what's that?
Is it in your self-interest?
They would ask, is it in your self-interest, right? Yeah. Max?
Also, it's like society is kind of breaking the contract by making it uneven.
That's right, society, so remember, the contract's gotta be reciprocal, and if other people in society are not obeying, you know, if society in general is not obeying that contract towards you, you're not bound by it, right? So you can do whatever you need to fix the situation, all right? So a social contract theorist would say, look, that oppressed group, they're not getting any benefit out of it, well, they're not getting the full benefit out of this contract. So they shouldn't be considered as bound by the contract at all, and they're not bound to support the institutions that are established by that contract, right? So citizens who aren't getting the full benefit are released from the contract, and that's a natural part of a natural consequence of point 3 here, okay? Just kind of looked at on a larger scale, not on the individual scale, but like on the social scale, okay? So, is this making sense to everybody? All right, so one thing I should kind of mention here is that Rachel's and others, they describe this civil disobedience as being a strength of social contract theory and a reason why we should like this kind of moral theory, right? And we should remember that social contract theory, it's not one theory, it's a type of theory, okay? And there's lots of specific social contract theories out there, just like there's just as many different social contract theories as there are types of social contract. Something funny or?
No, I was asking if you guys have the attendance sheet
Oh, no, okay. So anyway, I don't know, it looked like there was some kind of problem, like, I don't know, this doesn't seem funny to me, but.
already. I asked him.
Yeah, he wrote it on the paper, and I thought he was passing the attendance sheet.
Yeah, I have no idea what's going on there. Anyway, so whether or not civil disobedience would be considered ethical under social contract theory, it depends on who exactly you're talking to, right? So as we discussed back at the start, Hobbes, who created the theory, do you think Hobbes likes civil disobedience? No way, right? So he thought that by being in a society, you agree to obey anything that the government does, no matter how much you might disagree with it or how much it hurts you personally, right? And that's because to disobey the rules is to invite in anarchy and a return to the state of nature, right? And the state of nature, Hobbes says, it's always going to be worse than a civilized society, no matter how bad that society is, okay? On the other hand, like Locke and Rousseau, they talked a lot about how the contract works both ways. And a government, they say a government can only rule by the consensus of the people it governs, right? So if the people decide it's in their best interest to change the rules or to replace the entire government, it's their right to do that, even if it requires violent force. And they had this kind of focus on the right to revolt. That is why those thinkers were so influential on the leaders of the French and American revolutions, okay? All right, so we got through almost all of that, so definitely read chapter 12. We're gonna talk on chapter 12 on Thursday. We'll wrap this up, it's gonna take a few minutes, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna give you back your exams, all right? So when I call you, you can get your exam. If you don't have any questions, I'll see you on Thursday, all right? Let me say something about this exam. It had a very Georgia Southern grade distribution. It went like this. Okay. So there's about equal numbers of F's and A's. There's about 1/3 F's, 1/3 A's, and then 1/3 everything in between. All right. Very Georgia Southern. Gabby. Ansley. Walker. Ava. Talia. I think that's how you say that. Talia, sorry. Yeah, you. Jada. Jada Allen. Megan. Madison. Madison. Ruby. Logan. Kendall. Kendall. Walker. Will. You too. Caroline. Brian. Byron. Brian. Ella. Ella Smith. Yours isn't done yet. I just got it. Ella.